Hi, everyone. Hello, and welcome to our first episode of NMWA xChange, a spin-off of the award-winning pandemic live stream series co-created by educators at the National Museum of Women in the Arts and the Baltimore Museum of Art. For this new monthly series, our hosts from NMWA will be joined by special guests to center and celebrate women creatives. We will consider topics relevant to our world and offer insight into collaborations NMWA is fostering while its building is closed for renovation. During this time of change, we are excited to exchange ideas with our guests and viewers. Hi, I'm Adrienne Gayoso, NMWA's senior educator.
Hi, everyone. I'm Virginia Treanor. I'm NMWA's associate curator. And today we are discussing a DC legend, artist and educator, Alma Woodsey Thomas, as well as exploring the Little Paris group, which you may not have heard about, a mid-20th century Washington, D.C. based collective of Black artists established by artists Loïs Mailou Jones and Céline Tabary. We are absolutely thrilled that Dr. Adrienne Childs is joining us today. Hello, Dr. Childs. Dr. Childs is an independent scholar, art historian, and curator, and is an associate of the W.E.B. Du Bois Research Institute at the Hutchins Center at Harvard University. Her research interests include all aspects of race and representation from the 17th through the 20th centuries. She earned a PhD in the history of art from the University of Maryland, go Terps, and holds an undergraduate degree from Georgetown University and an MBA from Howard University. In 2020, Dr. Childs curated Rifts and Relations, African-American Artists and the European Modernist Tradition at the Phillips Collection here in DC, which included works by Alma Thomas as well as Loïs Mailou Jones. She's currently working on a book project entitled Ornamental Blackness, the Black Body in European Decorative Arts. Welcome, Dr. Childs.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Childs. Ginny and I have a few questions for you, and I'm guessing our audience will as well. For those of you joining us today, feel free to add your questions in the chat or Q&A, and we will do our best to touch on them today.
Great. And can we jump to that image of
Absolutely.
Alma Thomas?
And I've also enabled closed captioning for folks so that they can read along if they like. Okay.
So Dr. Childs, Alma Thomas is rightly one of the most well-known artists from Washington, D.C., and in fact is being honored with a citywide and cross-institutional celebration over the coming months. And here's a photograph from her from our website. And I absolutely love her dress in this image. And we see her with her artwork and hanging it up to dry here. We are lucky at NMWA to have a few well-known later works in our collection by her. And NMWA has been committed to sharing Thomas's work since we opened our doors in 1987. And here you see iris, tulips, jonquils, and crocuses on the left, and Orion on the right. And these were both part of our founder's original gift to the museum and have pretty much been on view ever since we opened. So while we're looking at these works, can you, Dr. Childs, tell us just briefly about Alma Thomas's life and career?
Well, I'd be happy to, and thank you all for inviting me to come. And I'll just say one more thing about my little bio, that I'm currently an adjunct curator at the Phillips Collection, and so we're really looking forward to hosting the Alma Thomas show very, very soon. I think that Alma Thomas has one of the one of the most interesting and unusual careers of any 20th century African-American artist, or American artist for that matter. She was born in 1891, 120 years ago. And now we're just beginning to sort of understand the breadth and depth of her work and life. A lot, largely due to that wonderful exhibition that we're sort of celebrating. Everything is beautiful. But in short, she spent most of her life and career in DC. So we consider her a DC artist, even though she was born in Columbus, Ohio. And she became Georgia. That too. The Columbus is huge. It's a huge city. It spans several states. So she was the first graduate of Howard University's art department. And so that is very important because Howard University, it becomes a sort of regenerative force in the DC area. But she went on from there to teach in the DC public schools for many years. She taught art, so she was always involved with art. And we're learning from the exhibition that she was involved in a lot of other things. She made puppets, she designed costumes, and she's always had a creative life. But it wasn't until she retired, I mean, as the larger contours of the story go, she retires or begins to get toward retirement and then starts looking toward her own career as an artist. And so she's an older woman, and older, I'm putting in quotes, and she, so this is what makes her, it starts to get really interesting, how she finds her voice through abstraction eventually, and that's what we know her for. She gains like national notoriety. She becomes the first Black person really to get a one-person show, I think, at the Whitney Museum in New York. That's not in DC. So she is picked up because of exhibitions that she is featured in around the country. She gets picked up by some of the most, like the biggest names and biggest voices in contemporary art. And so she's also a woman who is in the sort of circle of what we call the Washington Color School, or the periphery of that. She gets associated with some of the major male artists who are driving this new form in DC. But we also know that those artists are in the kind of periphery or in the network of the artists we think of as abstract expressionists. So you're thinking at mid-century is this little tiny Black woman who is working in somewhat of an abstract expressionist mode and gaining a lot of attention. I think it's really interesting that she's part of this bigger shift in the art world that we don't always think of as being driven by Black artists, but they were very much involved. And it's really great that we're getting to put her into a bigger context now.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's interesting that you mentioned that she was of small stature, because the works that we actually have in our collection and that she's quite well known for are very large works.
Yeah.
And as a way of transitioning, I wanted to share, this is big for us because the piece is small. It's sort of this intimate abstraction that she created around the same time that she created the last two images we saw. But this is actually a new acquisition to NMWA's collection. We acquired it through a generous donation in 2020. And so all of you who are watching today, this is actually the first time it's been on view through NMWA. It hasn't even been shown in our galleries yet, but this shows a little bit of her scope of size or scale of her works. And again, we're seeing an abstraction here, but also just her, the way that she approached using color and these more abstracted sort of Alma stripes, for which she is very well known in this beautiful little image. I wanted to talk a little bit more about this exhibition that you mentioned, Dr. Childs. It's called Alma W. Thomas, Everything is Beautiful. And it really deserves credit, as you said, for celebrating the entirety of Thomas's body of work, not just her latter abstractions, for which NMWA shows and and we talk most about. The exhibition also contextualized Thomas's work within a larger community. Sometimes the fact that she's a part of this wide and vibrant community of artists in DC gets eclipsed. The exhibition sheds more light on this community, which she was a part of, by sharing the art of her peers and contemporaries, as well as the wider artistic movements that shaped her work. Dr. Childs, can you talk a little bit about the art community here in DC when Thomas was working, and specifically touch a little bit more on what we know about the Little Paris group?
Yes, so this is an interesting time period in Washington, D.C., where you're talking about mid-century. But I think in order to sort of understand about that time, you have to go back a little bit and to look at Howard University as basically a driving force behind the Black art scene and the contemporary art scene in many ways in DC, not just the Black art scene. But Howard is founded in the university department was founded in 1921 and the gallery in 1928. And from the very beginning, they were doing pioneering kind of Black art education and thinking about art as not just sort of a kind of superfluous side kind of education. It was part of a well-rounded education for Black students, and as a sort of a way of becoming vested in the political and cultural life, and creating what a voice for artists that have been marginalized. I mean, it's a very important part of Howard University's sort of profile at that time. And this is sort of on the heels, or kind of mixed in with the Harlem Renaissance, what's going on there, and then to trying to create a center really in DC for the arts. And they were very successful at that, I think. They were involved in there's a big exhibition in 1933 called Exhibition of Works by Negro Artists at the National Gallery of Art, which was actually American art now, but bringing together, I mean, there's some of the Howard people were instrumental in bringing that together. Lois Jones did exhibit in that exhibition. There were only two women artists in that exhibition, but at any rate, so Howard, the energy, they were very much involved in what's going on around the city. Certainly with the Phillips, the collection, Duncan Phillips was very much involved with Alonzo Aden and Herring, Professor Herring, who chaired the department, lending works. And so there's a lot of kind of exchange in this interracial, intercultural art scene that's growing up. And then of course, one of the major events is that both Alonzo Aden, who worked at the Howard Gallery, and then Herring, Professor Herring, established the Barnett Aden collection in 1943. And that was in their home. And it's still linked to Howard because it's being established by Howard professors or Howard people who work there, but it moves beyond Howard and starts and engages in all different kinds of art circles in the city, and it becomes very important. And Alma Thomas is actually one of their founding vice president, I just read. So she becomes involved at that early time. So even though this is in 43, before she really becomes what we think of, in her avant-garde, her abstraction career, she's still a vital part of the sort of administration, right? And she's very much a part of the art scene. We can't forget that.
And she knew them, if I just interject for a second, because you mentioned this before, she knew them because she was the first graduate, right. Of the art program at Howard in 1924.
And she had been involved. I mean, she was continuously bringing students back to Howard, and she wasn't a stranger. She showed, I think, some of her the puppets, I think, were shown at the Howard Gallery, some of the puppets that she made with her students. So there's a lot of exchange. So they saw her as a competent force in the art world, and she did exhibit there as well. And so did Lois Jones. There were, and there were white artists and European artists, a mix of artists that were exhibiting. So there's this kind of new energy, and this is the first major Black art gallery in the nation, really the one that's successful in the United States. So this says a lot in the 1940s. But I guess we're thinking about this Little Paris group that Thomas was involved with. But of course, it's established by Lois Jones and Céline Tabary. Tabary is a French artist who Lois met in the Académie Julienne when she went to Paris. So Lois Jones, I'm calling her Lois, like we're on a first name basis. I just can't stop calling her Lois. Anyway, so she goes to France, and I'm going to say 1935, but I might be lying. I don't have that date stuck in my head. But she goes to France in the 1930s. She's already teaching at Howard, and just like many African American artists did, there's an interest in modernism. There's an interest in the kind of freedom, and there's you can get admitted to schools readily where you couldn't necessarily in the United States. So she meets Tabary at the Académie Julienne. They become fast friends and old friends, and eventually Tabary comes to the United States, and they start this Little Paris group. Obviously, it's modeled, and I mean, there's not a lot known about it, right? So what is it modeled? It's called Little Paris Group, so it certainly celebrates their connection. But I'm thinking it's modeled off of a kind of like the Académie Julienne or some of the other academies in France that they admitted people of color in those academies. They admitted women. They were kind of a salon. You get to critique, you get to sketch, you get to, engage with other artists. And I think that Jones and Tabary were very much interested in replicating that here. And this picture is really interesting to me because it shows you the artists that are there. There's many female artists, and many of them were school teachers. And there's a guest artist who is Richard Dempsey, who was a well-known DC artist at the time. He's got I think the brushes in his hand. And I was a little upset at first when I didn't see that there was a female artist who also had brushes in her hand. So I thought, okay, that's all right. 'Cause I didn't want him to be the only one in control. And then what's shocking to me is the nude, the male nude there. And that it's very kind of radical to think that they're in her home, and he was semi-nude, right? But I would assume he may have been nude when they're sketching him. So they're trying to veil themselves. I mean, I will also see a nude in the background. They veil themselves of these kind of, these kinds of opportunities they may have gotten in a Paris studio that may not have gotten here in the United States. So I think it's an atmosphere that they may have found after they founded this. This was founded in 48, we think. This is after the Barnett Aiden collection was founded, but maybe they're thinking about, this kind of atmosphere in one's home, right? The Phillips collection was a very important, also important locus for not only artists to come, because a lot of Black artists were welcome there, but it was in his home. It's a home atmosphere, and that gets replicated in Barnett Aiden, and then to a certain extent gets replicated here from what I can see.
Yeah, so this little Paris group actually operated out of the attic, I believe, of Lois Mailou Jones's house. And just for those of you who are familiar with Washington, D.C., this was over on Quincy Street in Northeast by University.
Yeah. And I really love, Dr. Childs, that you really point out. I mean, I think this picture is really telling because it gives us a sense of the diversity of this group, but also that they've included and incorporated this male model. And I think if we think about traditions of female artists and what they had opportunities to, the opportunities they had in terms of training and access to live models, and certainly live male models, was very rare even in training early in the 20th century for women. So I think that he is included in this image is a really an important element of this particular message of this work, of this group.
And in terms of Thomas's experiences here, like I said, we haven't been able to dig up. Those who have been really researching this have not dug up a lot yet about this, but there are more people looking into it. And but I think that we think of Thomas as a pioneer, an outlier in abstraction and everything, but she went through the traditional training as well. And I think that we've come to the conclusion that the training here was based on the kind of, I will say, traditional kind of maybe a bit avant-garde, but training of artists that like we would find in the Parisian or the French schools, but it wasn't necessarily abstraction in the same way that she would come to, but it was modernist. So, but we're assuming that that's this sort of more traditional. And by the 40s, the modernists aren't necessarily the avant-garde anymore. But it's interesting that Thomas goes to Europe, Alma Thomas, in 1958 after her. I wonder if that is this experience in the Little Paris group. And you can imagine that they talked about it. Their experiences there did anything to encourage her any more than any other artist who's anybody who's in the art world knows that going there is kind of some ways a rite of passage or something to do that could be important. But she does go in 1958, and then her style does change after that.
Yeah, and I think what we understand about Thomas is that she wasn't really with the Little Paris group for terribly long. We believe that she probably was there with the group and engaging with them for a few years. And by 1952, she was sort of moving on and sort of exploring different modes of expression and moving towards the abstraction, as you said, we know well today. Jenny, I know we have some more questions and we want to share some contextual info. Oh, Adrienne, you want to go ahead? Yeah,
Oh,
sorry.
yeah. Another thing I was just gonna, I'm sorry, if we, before we
No,
move
no.
on from this. And I'm just speculating here, but I recently read Rebecca Van Diver's book on Lois Jones, Designing a New Tradition, in which she reveals that there was it was a male-dominated atmosphere at Howard University, a patriarchal kind of atmosphere. And then Lois Jones was not promoted in the ways that she had expected. She never became chair. I mean, this is over her many decades there. So don't think of it as at one point, but there was a feeling that she did not get the opportunities that the male artists also did. So the Herring and Aiden go out and establish the Herring and Alonzo, go out and establish the Barnett Aiden. Then Elaine Locke is, of course, a major force in his own right, and has been for decades. And even the DC art scene is sort of driven by these men and the groups that are led by men and alliances through men. And I wonder whether or not, first of all, her trips to Paris in the first place, and her alliance with Céline, and also their decision to start their own group and then drive the narrative, drive the not just the narrative, but the energy around art in her own home was a part of the fact that she just, I feel like was passed over in many ways, as she never became chair. Like I said, even our dear David Driscoll, who we love, was her student, and then came back after working at another university, came back to teach there, and was promoted above her to a chair position. So these things are I think all kind of baked into the fact that I'm going to make my own.
Yeah. I think what we're seeing here really is sort of this really an affinity group of African-American artists who are supporting each other, but also, as you say, it's really this sort of female dominated group, this circle that is sort of making its way in a city that is still largely sort of focused on and really promoting men, and specifically often white men. Yeah. I know Jenny has some questions. I want to, since we're talking right now and sort of circling around the little Paris group, I just want to mention we don't know a ton about this group, which I find interesting. And I'm curious, Dr. Childs, what you're still wondering about this group, and sort of why you think maybe we don't have a lot of answers to who this group was and how they operated.
Yeah, well, first of all, there's a couple of artists that have come out of there who I've heard of. That doesn't mean I don't know everything, but I do. Delilah Pierce is one who has had some notoriety, probably not as much as she deserves, but will be. Richard Dempsey as well is one that I've heard, and the others I have not heard of. And we know, like I said, that there were many school teachers there. And I have to just shout out to my mother, was a school teacher and an artist, and we had exhibitions in our home of her work. So there you have it. But I wondered whether there was a central teacher, whether there was one, was it Jones, was it Tabary, was there one person? Did they just take turns teaching each other? But Jones was a teacher, so was Tabary, so perhaps. I wondered, did they pay dues?
Right, yeah.
I don't know why I wonder that. Was there a really formal structure? Did they go on field trips? Did they have a public profile outside of this group? Did they invite people in? And I know they had at least one exhibition, right?
Yeah, we have the pamphlet. I think it's at the archives of American art. Yeah.
And was there a social? You can't have this many. I'm sorry, everybody. Black women get together without having a great time. So it had to have a social aspect. So what was that? And also I think about these ladies who are very, Washington, DC, middle class, upper middle class, whatever, conservative, to be in there with this, nearly nude man. I think that it was pretty an interesting group that they understood how you have to the different kinds of interactions you need and they were pretty avant-garde in some ways.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think, the presence of that model really speaks to, and maybe this is a gross generalization on my part, but kind of that European attitude, right? I think, you know, studying from a model, mostly nude model was probably, you know, more readily accepted in Paris, where Mailou Jones spent so much time, and Tabary was also studying, and then they kind of, you know, imported that that way of operating back to the U.S., back to Washington, D.C. I do want to mention that it recently came to my attention, as in like 3 days ago, that there is an Instagram account called Plain Sight Archives that is doing a lot of interesting things around the Little Paris group and posting a lot of interesting things and trying to make these connections between the different members. So if, you know, if anyone is interested in following them, they're posting some really great stuff. I want to just quickly talk a little bit more about Jones and Tabary and Thomas in this context of the Little Paris group. And I want to point out that in this image, we see all of them. So we can see Alma Thomas at the right. She's seated. You can see her in profile. And she's probably the oldest in the group. Mm-hmm. And then Loïs Mailou Jones, I believe, is directly behind her. Mm. Whoops, what happened to the image?
You not see it?
No, we lost it. That's weird. I was asking about the Instagram group. It's plain_sight_archives, Plain Sight Archives.
We got to get that picture back.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Because I think Loïs Jones was on the forefront, sitting on the front, on the floor, and we weren't seeing her.
Oh.
That's what I think. I would like to see it again.
Sorry, folks, I'm having some technical difficulties right now, but if you want to continue sharing, Jenny.
Yeah. So just, you know, that Alma Thomas, you know, was a part of this group for a time. You know, she knew these women. She knew she was part of this artistic community in Washington, D.C. And that's something that the exhibition, Everything is Beautiful, does a really nice job of contextualizing her work. And so in order to help tell that story, NMWA actually lent 2 works to the exhibition, one by Jones and one by Tabary. And if we can get the screen back up.
I'm sorry, Jenny, there's something wrong with my screen. I'm gonna have to probably kick out and come back in. Just keep sharing your,
Okay. And can I share my screen?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
I'm allowed to do that, okay.
I've completely lost control of the screen, of course, because we're live and that's what happens.
That's so our first, share my screen. Can you see?
Sorry, folks. I can see it. Are you sharing, Jenny? I think I can see it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go back to that image. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So Alma Thomas and Loïs Mailou Jones seated there on the right, and then at the far left, kind of coming up the stairs, you see Céline Tabary. Yeah.
Okay, so in the caption it says that you're right, that is Jones there with the vest, but for some reason it just seemed, you know, I wanted to say that was her sitting on the ground, but it probably isn't, because they're the ones.
That is Desdemona Wade.
I figured that was Desdemona.
Who has the best name ever.
I know, exactly.
I love that name. Yeah, so again, then just to now move forward. So these are the 2 paintings that we lent to the exhibition. On the left, we have this work by Loïs Mailou Jones that she painted during one of her sabbaticals in France. And then on the right, a painting by Céline Tabary, both around the same time, late 1940s, early 1950s. And you can see that they are very much working within the visual language of European modernism. Jones's landscape is very reminiscent of Cézanne's landscapes, while Tabary's cafe scene, you get kind of the prismatic perspective of Cubism. And just to give you an idea of, for those of you who are joining us, an idea of what Thomas's earlier works look like. This is from 1952. This is in the collection of the David Driscoll Center at the University of Maryland. And here you see, a representational image of a still life, again, very kind of working within that language of modernism. And, I think, to be able to understand Alma Thomas's later works, her abstract works that we're most familiar with, it's really important to understand, as you said, Dr. Childs, that how she was trained and kind of the tradition that she came up in, and what her exposure was over the course of her career to different artistic ideas and different thoughts about what art is, what art should look like. And I'd like to ask you about the exhibition that you curated at the Phillips, Rifts and Relations, and you had the work of both Alma Thomas and Lois Mailou Jones in that exhibition. So can you talk a little bit about how their work kind of fit into that story you were telling in that exhibition?
Oh, yeah. So it's interesting. The exhibition was, the big idea was to think about how African-American artists have engaged sort of traditional European modernism, meaning sort of early 20th century modernism, throughout the 20th and into the 21st century, and the different ways that Black American artists have not only engaged it, but reacted to it, because it's such a powerful force. And African-American art, if you will, grows up in the 20th century along with modernism. So it's engaged and entangled from the very, very beginning. But after the years go on, some artists, postmodern, if you will, become disenchanted with the power structures of art history, and some of the art of the modernist artists like Picasso in particular become sort of the villains, or the power dynamics of art history becomes a subject that it gets entangled with race. And so, of course, European modernism, Cubism in particular, Expressionism, was also entangled with African art and African objects, the colonialism. So these are subjects that come along later. So there becomes kind of a fraught relationship. So this exhibition looked at all of that, from the people who are riffing or speaking back to those canonical objects, and then the people who actually relate to them. Because look, many African-American artists were actually modernists and were nourished by really interesting things that were going on in the modernist aesthetic. So we had Jones obviously was nourished by her time in Europe and her relationship to actual modernists and modernism in general. Certainly Cézanne was a big influence, and some of the other plein air painters. So we had her work in there alongside Maurice Utrillo, who both of them were at the same exact spot, painting near Montmartre. And so looking at sort of the place, a sense of place, because Jones painted outside. So what was it like for a Black woman to come along and paint here where the other Impressionists were doing it? And then interestingly, Thomas, who we weren't necessarily associated with European modernism, does one major piece called Watusi that she quotes verbatim, almost quotes Matisse. And so we looked at that interesting exchange and how it becomes politicized later on when Michelle Obama decided to put it in her office. She got some pushback from the crabby people out there who said that Obama's almost like didn't have any taste, because they were looking at this derivative art and it had no appreciation for the fact that all of these artists speak to each other and speak back to each other. I mean, nobody's art was more derivative than Picasso, who was always looking at the old masters. So anyway, but that politics gets wound up in it. So that was kind of, that's how we used them. And then we had other local artists too. David Driscoll was there,
Mhm.
Harold Cousins, who was someone who's not one of the usual suspects, but a sculptor who went over there and never came back. James Wells was in the show too. So it was we had a critical mass of DC artists in the show.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, you know, that there was, and I hesitate to use this term, it's kind of loaded, but you know, this golden age, right, of art in Washington, D.C. In the mid 20th century, particularly for Black artists. And I just think it's, you know, clearly there's so much more work to be done on it. You know, we talked about the Little Paris group and how there's, you know, not a lot known about them. But, you know, I just think it's such an important part of the history of art, not only in this country, but in this region as well. And I think I shared with you, you know, when we talked a few weeks ago, that here I am, you know, I born in Washington, D.C., am an art historian, you know, did my master's and PhD work here in the area. And, you know, this chapter of art history just, you know, is a revelation for me within the past 5 years. And I just, you know, I want everyone to know about it, because I think it's so incredibly fascinating.
Well, you know, who's telling the stories, right? I mean, the Driscoll
Exactly.
Center has done a lot, and they're just starting to be observed, and the archives are starting to be mined, but we don't have as many archives as we would like to have. But there
Yeah.
is material out there. I mean, Rebecca Van Diver found a lot about Lois Jones that had not been tapped.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of just focusing on those artists. And maybe that's why we don't know a lot about the Little Paris group. We don't know where some of these artists' work is, but I guarantee you something will come up out of that.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I don't know, let me just double check the chat, if we dropped in the bit about Van Diver's book.
Yes, we did. Laura put it in for us. Yeah,
because absolutely an essential resource for anyone, yeah, wanting to know more about this.
well, I wanted to like re-invite anyone who's listening today. We want to thank our attendees for joining us, but we're wondering if anyone has any questions. We would be happy to try to answer those for you today. We don't necessarily have all of the answers, but we can certainly try, and we love to hear the questions folks have about Alma Thomas, about the Little Paris group, and then we can share a little bit more about the exhibition that will be shortly coming to DC. But first, we'll sort of see if there are any additional questions. And I guess while we're doing that, Jenny, we can mention the Everything is Beautiful exhibition.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, sorry, I'm having technical issues today. That always happens.
Well, it wouldn't be a Zoom presentation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We did have a question come through. So
oh, great. Thanks, Laura.
I'll share one, but I would like, first, let's hear about this.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to put this up for people. I know I kind of ran through those dates quickly at the top of the talk. So this is the exhibition that's on now at the Chrysler Museum of Art in Norfolk, Virginia. Alma W. Thomas, Everything is Beautiful. It's on view there through October 3rd. Then it's coming here to Washington, D.C., to the Phillips Collection beginning October 30th through January 23rd of next year. Then on to the First Art Museum in Nashville, Tennessee. And finally, the Columbus Museum in Columbus, Georgia, which is Alma Thomas's hometown. And that is next summer of 2022. So you have many opportunities to see this wonderful exhibition. And I will mention that the Chrysler Museum of Art's website for the exhibition, there's a wonderful walkthrough tour. And you can tell that I took this image from, you see all those little dots on the right side. I just grabbed a screenshot of it, but it's really, I mean, it's great. You can literally walk through it and read all the text, and it's very well done.
Laura, what's your question?
So we have one comment, which I just thought was interesting. So I want to share with the group, which is that one of our participants noticed one of their Howard architecture professors, Frank West, in the little
Oh,
Harris group photo.
that's amazing.
Oh, yeah.
How cool.
That's just a fun piece of local history there.
Yeah.
And then we also got a question. Were female artists like Thomas and Jones able to support themselves with art, or did they need a side gig?
Well, I would say yes. They were able, well, they were teachers as well. So this, maybe the side gig is the fact that they had to be full-time professors. Jones was a professor, Thomas was a teacher and went through to retirement. And then they were able to support themselves after that with their art and whatever retirement they had from those. So well, perhaps, and we find that with many artists, and the ones who are able to leave teaching are very lucky.
And I will say too, and I think we may have touched on it a little bit, but keeping in mind for everyone who's viewing that Thomas didn't really get much recognition for her work until she was in her 70s, right? That was when she had her first exhibition at the Whitney, and then there was a show of her work in 1971 at the Fisk, I believe, or the Fisk, excuse me. So she wasn't really getting sort of that attention until later on in her life. So many of, and I just, one of the things that really strikes me and I admire so much about Alma Thomas is that she was a teacher for 35 years in DC public schools, and she was creative during that time. She was making throughout her life, but she was also really spending that time and energy supporting and sort of mentoring students and creating exhibitions for their work, and even finding ways to celebrate sort of Black History Month before it truly existed in this country. So she didn't have children of her own, I think she really helped to raise a generation of children in DC that became art makers and art lovers as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And Loïs Mailou Jones too, at Howard University, as Dr. Child mentioned, David Driscoll was one of her students. So yeah, the legacies of these women definitely live on even today.
Yeah.
We have a couple more questions coming in. One is, how do you deal with pieces in the manner of Alma Thomas in these online auction houses? When you look at the upset price, you know something's wrong, the prices are so low. So I know it's a little different, but
I don't really engage much with the commercial aspects, but I would just say beware. And it's a shame that kind of thing happens, but I don't know.
Yeah, you just have to do your own research and keep your eyes open.
here is another question. Please elaborate on the statement when you mentioned that Alma Thomas was doing her own thing by the 1950s and was no longer associated with the Little Paris group.
Well, I think I mentioned that. My understanding is that she'd sort of moved away from the Little Paris group. My assumption is, and perhaps Dr. Childs knows better, but I think it was because she had enrolled, I believe, in a graduate program, is that right? And she started really thinking more about abstraction. And so I think because the Little Paris group, as we saw from some of the examples, was sort of, they were taking sort of an academic sort of approach to their work and really choosing very traditional genres. I think that she was sort of moving away in terms of content and also just sort of her visual language, but I'll let Dr. Childs talk more about that if she has a better insight.
Well, she enrolled in graduate courses at American University in the 50s, and she was working under, one of them was Jacob Kanan, who was part of the Washington Color School. So I think that that she started just moving away, just move through the little periscope. I think she stayed there for several years, but it's really hard to know because we don't know a lot about it. But I think that's what you're saying, and just continuing to develop. And that's pretty much the way it goes. And I would imagine if we followed the careers of some of the others, we would have find the same thing, that we don't know when the group broke up, but they may have gone on to do other things and just continue to enhance their learning, because artists are always learning at any way, way.
Yeah, I think the curators of the exhibition note that they kind of talk about how she said that she was interested in doing quote unquote creative painting, right? So not so rooted to representation. And so I think she just kind of followed her own path.
What's interesting is that there's a lot of people people talk about her sometimes crippling arthritis. And I wonder whether or not that had anything to do with changing the way you move your hands. I wonder if that had anything to do with you this more simplified style that was expressive in ways that you didn't have to move your hands in certain ways. I don't really paint in any way, so I can't tell you, but I just wonder whether that had anything to do with it as well.
Yeah. Laura said we have one more question that we'd like to get to before we wrap up today. Go ahead, Laura.
So one of the women in the photo is unidentified. The woman in the front mostly turned away from the camera. Do you have any idea who she is? The caption identifies her as Desmona Wade, but Wade is between the model and Jones. And I think, Ginny, you can use your cursor and we'll be able to see.
So I think she's asking about this woman here. Okay, so I was reading that as Desmona Wade, but yeah, it looks like, okay, so we have Russell Nesbitt, who's the model. Then this woman kind of gets skipped over. Lois, Mailou Jones, Alma Thomas. So it seems like the person asking the question is saying that, no, this is Desmona Wade. So then that leaves.
I saw a picture in the Instagram account that you mentioned that tried to identify all these artists. So
we should definitely check out Plain Sight Archive to learn a little bit more, right?
They're on it. They're on the
And let's help the people from Plain Sight Archive reveal themselves to us.
Yes. Yeah, we're very curious.
You're doing good work.
We are getting close to time, and I really wanted to we want to thank Dr. Childs for her time, but as a way of wrapping up, we just wanted to re-mention that if you love Thomas as much as we do, you should check out the live and virtual events that are part of the DC citywide celebration of Thomas. And that we hope that you'll join us for our next episode of NMWA xChange on Tuesday, October 12th, same time, 12 noon Eastern, same place, Zoom. Our topic will be, where do we go from here? Conceptual artist Jamie Porter Lara joins us to discuss her Blackware sculptures and her current work that investigates and critiques whiteness. Register, please, anytime today. We'd love it. And we will see you next month. And Dr. Childs, thank you so much for your time today and for your willingness to talk about some topics that still raise a lot of questions.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful. And thank you everyone for joining us. And I hope you can join us next time. Take care.
Thanks. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.